Nobody here. Okay.
Nobody here but us
Good
chickens.
evening. I'll call together to order the Town of Shelburne Development Review Board meeting for Wednesday, October 18th, 2017. We'll call the meeting to order. And before we get started with public comment, I probably should ask if there's any need for anyone to recuse themselves from anything on the agenda this evening. Take it not. All right, so invite public comment at this time if anyone has any comments. I don't think so. Anybody from the board? No? And we'll move on to approval of our meeting minutes from our October 4, 2017 meeting, our historically short meeting. Does anyone have any revisions or edits to the October 4th meeting minutes? Hearing none, I'll take a motion to approve the October 4, 2017 meeting minutes. Second, please. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? None. Motion carries. This takes us to the next item on our agenda, which is design review applications. There's actually three. The first is DR 17-14, application of Kim Nolan at 43 Fisher Place for the installation of a new fence. Doesn't seem like anyone's here for that. Did everybody have a chance to take a look at that? I drove by today just to get my bearings. And to me, it seemed like a fair application. I would move to grant the design review approval for application DR 17-14 for a new fence at 43 Fisher Place with the condition that a zoning permit be required prior to commencing construction. Can I have a second?
Second.
All in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? None. Motion carries. The next item on our agenda is also, I believe, a fence application. It's design review approval for new fencing at 26 Fisher Place. Does anyone have any questions or comments about this application? Different style fence, but kind of modern looking. And hearing none, I'll make a motion to grant design review approval of application DR 17-15 for installation of a new fence at 26 Fisher Place.
Second that?
All in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? None. Motion carries. And that brings us to just 7:05. And probably, let me just see what, we're ahead of the game here. So probably should I'm assuming somebody's going to come to talk about the Willow Pond Farm Bed and Breakfast, perhaps? Oh, okay, great.
We have one more roof to go.
Oh, we did? Did I miss that? Start with the green roof. Right. So sorry. Thank you. Next matter on our agenda is the design review application of Castle on the Water LLC. It's a application to install a forest green metal roof to match I guess it's the shutters, the mobile home located at 176 Shelburne Wood Drive. Does anyone have any questions or comments? Hearing none, I'll make a motion to grant design review approval of application DR 17-16 for a new forest green metal roof at 176 Shelburne Wood Drive with the condition that a zoning permit be obtained before installation. All in favor? Aye. Motion carries. Next now, we'll go on to the conditional use site plan application of the Willow Pond Farm Bed and Breakfast located at 133 Cheese Factory Lane. It's application SP 17-06. Is there anyone here in the audience to testify or give evidence in connection with the application? If you would approach the microphone.
Hello, I'm Bettina Stark.
Can you raise your right hand, Ms.
Yes.
Stark? Did you swear or affirm to tell the whole truth and nothing but the truth in connection with this application and any evidence you should give this evening?
I do.
All right, why don't you tell us a little bit about what's going on?
Well, home was recently purchased by myself and my husband, September 1st. The farm enjoyed many years of being a successful bed and breakfast, much enjoyed, from 1994 to 2014, whereupon it was closed exactly 3 years ago by Zita Lee, who became ill and passed away this past May. And my husband and I have purchased the house, and we are interested in rekindling this business.
Any comments from the staff?
Just want to get one clarification. The application said 6 guests. Is that 6 rooms?
No, actually, our neighbor, Lynn Walker, called me and said that it said 6 bedrooms, but no, it's 3.
And up to 2 guests per room, is that the idea?
Yeah.
Anything else, Kate? No?
Um,
Does anyone on the board have any questions of the applicant?
So Kate, your notes mention about parking.
You're right.
I was wondering if we can talk about parking a little bit. What's the situation like?
There is gravel, and there's a enclosed garage for the homeowners, and then there's a gravel, a gravel area that can accommodate 4 cars outside the house. I could supply photographs if that would be helpful. I don't have them along, but, you know, I could send them. We had discussed that by email. Yeah.
Yeah, so from the aerial, there's an area for parking. Whether or not it should be striped or delineated in a more formal way is kind of up to you guys. I don't believe it had been in the past, but as long as there's an adequate space. And since there's only, sorry.
I just might say it's quite obvious because the grass frames the gravel area, so that in its sense is a landscaping marcation of the parking area.
Your map shows a parking area, I believe. It's a little bump out, is that correct?
Can I come and look
Oh.
at that?
Yeah.
Sorry.
Is this little bump out right here?
Yeah,
Okay, thank you.
sure.
That?
Yeah, right. Yeah,
Okay.
it's actually right there.
And you better get
Yeah.
back to, and that is the bump out that accommodates a total of 4 cars?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Concerned about parking.
No, I'm not
Given
that
the-
concerned.
The small nature
Small,
of
it's off the lane,
Yeah.
don't wanna mess around. If they get stuck, you have to push them out.
It's relatively flat.
Cool.
Great.
I was just looking at I guess it's the fire marshal's report, and it seems to give you a list of things
To accomplish.
to accomplish.
Yeah.
So I'm assuming that that's part of your plan.
Yeah, we're on board with that. The electrician's been there and done all of the smoke alarms and electrical work. I need to do a little bit more research on the second means of escape for the bedrooms that don't supply that. That would be the upper story. So I'm still working on that. We're at this point, we're shooting for the spring. So I think I have some time for window research.
What's our approval for? Change of use?
So it's a discontinued use, so if
Right.
it's something, I'm not totally sure that bed and breakfast ever got an approval to begin with. Yeah,
Okay.
No,
so,
it did. I mean,
Okay.
with the Department of Health.
okay,
And-
so to the town.
Yeah.
Okay.
So zoning approval.
Got it.
So, and even, so conditional uses expire after 2 years if they're not actually being
Okay.
used.
Thank you.
I'll move then to finalize the record, and also to close the hearing with an indication of approval. with the condition that a zoning permit be required before any structural improvements are made, and any proposed signage get a permit, and that the applicant follow through with the recommendations from the fire department.
Okay.
I have a second to those twin, did you,
I just have a question with regard to the signage. That's a separate
process?
approval process?
Yes.
Okay. Because there is actually signage, but probably hadn't undergone this. It's clearly marked in every bend in the road on the lane which way to go.
Do we care about the lane, or is it more so off of Cheese Factory Road? The lane's private
The
property.
lane is private, as I understand, so.
Right. So I
I
don't know
don't
if,
think we care about that, but if there's going to be a sign put out, it's just that the order will say, if you're going to do a sign, you have to get a permit. If there is already a sign that says ABC Bed and Breakfast, I actually think you still, if the use has been suspended, you would still need another permit for the sign, yes?
No, if there's an existing sign, it can stay, so only if you replace the
Doing new.
sign. On the building too, if you put a sign on the building, just,
There's a sign at the mouth of Cheese Factory Lane along Cheese Factory Road. It's actually attached to the top of the mailbox.
oh, okay. So
Still
if it-
there.
Yeah, if it's already existing,
I don't know where that's at.
Do you know the Bread and Butter Farm?
Yeah,
It's the next, when you're coming,
and there's a sign there.
yeah, it's on top of the,
Okay,
it's faded.
it's faded, okay.
Maybe I should
Go with that.
make a new sign.
mailbox, really?
Yeah, it is, yeah. One of my father-in-law's concoctions, I think,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay, so I think we got a second to the motion, so, did we?
Second?
Yeah. Joanna, I think. Any further discussion? All in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? None. Motion carries. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. The next matter on our agenda is a subdivision sketch plan application. It's SUB 17-02. It qualifies as a major subdivision. It's located at 25 and 39 Irish Hill Road. The applicant is the Sterling Land Company, and the owners are Lee Coleman and Julie Welch. It's a proposal to reconfigure an existing lot from 4 lots to 3. Is there anyone here to testify in connection with this application? Okay, great. Who wants to go first? There we go.
Andy Rowe with Lam-
We should be on, yes.
Andy Rowe with Lammer Owen Dickinson. Also here are the applicants, Bart Frisbee and Colin Frisbee of Sterling Land Company.
Okay, great.
That's what I meant.
Yes, I will in just
I'm
a
just
second.
going to put up
please.
the overall
Thank you for the reminder.
vicinity map, just. Is that all right back here?
It works. Andy, we have to swear you in before you get started. Raise your right hand, please. Do you swear or affirm to tell the whole truth and nothing but the truth in connection with any evidence or testimony you should give this evening?
I do.
Okay, why don't you give us a little overview?
So this property involves 5.3 acres on the north side of Irish Hill Road. It abuts the Rivercrest open space, which is to the east. La Platte River runs along the west side, Irish Hill Road along the south. The La Platte Nature Area is on the opposite side of the river. And then single-family homes, both uphill on Irish Hill Road and across Irish Hill Road. Currently, there's one mobile home on the property. The property actually consists of 2 lots, a 5-acre parcel and a 0.3-acre parcel. Historically, there's
Hang on a
been,
second, Mary Ann, can you hit the lights? Or at least the front lights here? Thanks, Chris. That's a little bit better. Whoa. There, that's good. Thank you.
so there's one existing mobile home on the property now on the 0.3-acre lot. Historically, there's also been a second mobile home on the larger 5-acre lot down here. And then there's an old barn that's surrounded by thick vegetation in the floodplain and watercourse overlay district. The project's in the Shelburne Falls mixed use. This is the zoning line currently. We're not proposing to adjust that line at all. So north of that is the residential district. To the south is the Shelburne Falls mixed use district. And then the hatched area along the river is that floodplain and watercourse overlay district. And that, there's a couple of bold lines here that make up the edge. It's either 100 feet from the center line of the river or 37 feet from the edge of the special flood hazard area. So that's what those two bold lines are, and obviously we're using the one that's furthest from the river. A total of 4 lots are proposed. The northerly lot would be open space that would be owned in common by the homeowners. 3 lots, each with a duplex with a 20-foot private road providing access. The 2 existing lots have municipal water and sewer services. We propose to replace those, but continue to have water and sewer service for each of these lots. This is not on the Spear Street service corridor. It's served by the distribution system that picks up the village. So we haven't talked to the water department yet, but we're not anticipating that water allocation will be an issue on this project. So that's a quick overview. I'll take questions, or we can go through the staff report, whatever the board's pleasure.
Does anyone Kate, anything to add? Did you have any questions or concerns that you wanted to voice?
Just a few comments in the staff report, but it's mostly a to be determined comment. One thing that I know got brought up, I think when I was, maybe the town manager, maybe the chief of police was, no, again, just kidding, is the site distances coming out. I talked to Andy briefly about it. The site distances coming
Okay.
out. So I talked to Andy briefly, and I believe it meets the minimum requirements based on the speed limit, but that is the, based on the speed limit, would assume that everybody's going the speed limit. So we want to talk a little more about that, maybe talk to a traffic or a transportation planner or engineer, and see if, there's any alternative, or talk to Andy about any alternative that would make it a little more clear. I know they had proposed or are proposing to clear out a little brush to open it up a little bit. But it still seems like a little bit of a tight spot. And then I think that was it. That was the only real concern. Just based on the limited amount of information in sketch, they seem to be meeting all the minimum requirements.
Probably a site visit would be appropriate, I think. We'll probably plan one of those. I do have a couple of questions, but let's work our way down the board, and then we'll get to the audience. Jeff, any questions you want to pass for now?
Yeah, I think I'll pass for now.
Mark?
I'm good for the moment.
Joanna?
Not right now.
Jeff?
When does a peripheral buffer come into play?
So that comes into play when you're doing a residential planned unit development. They're just doing a traditional subdivision, so that doesn't come into play. The buffers that they're showing are based on the floodplain and water course. So it's kind of acting like a buffer in a way, because it's quite a substantial amount of land back from the La Platte. But in this case, that's not applicable. They just have to meet the minimum yard requirements.
I'm focused on the distance from Irish Hill Road.
Okay.
Was that 20 feet?
It should be 30.
30
foot front
30
yard
feet.
setback.
The question I had, Andy, is there any way to angle the road a little bit more so it's a little farther away from the narrow bridge where the river goes under?
So we actually did originally have the road coming up here,
Yep.
but it actually reduces the site distances by a corresponding amount.
Oh, okay.
And so that's why we ended up here. That was sort of the ideal location for the site distances uphill. As I said, we did start out there. That was our initial layout, but we were short by a corresponding amount on achieving the required site distance to the uphill.
And to Jeff's concern, was any thought given to making the lot that's closest to Irish Hill Road open space and then putting one of the duplexes into the open space lot, or is it too hilly there?
So one thing I neglected to hit on during my overview was there's an intermittent stream here,
Okay,
and we're trying to stay south of that. There's no
Okay.
wetlands in this area.
gotcha.
You know, we're really trying to stay in this area, which, you know, it's definitely sloping, but it doesn't have the steep slopes that you've got to the north. We would have the stream to cross. We're just trying to cluster everything closest to Irish Hill Road rather than cross that stream and go into an area where the vegetation really changes. To the south, it's sort of thick, overgrown.
Okay, so I'm thinking duplexes, young families, 30 feet from a busy road. I go down that road quite often, and that road, if people are going the speed limit, that's a good day. Most of the time, they're going faster than the speed limit. I just don't feel good about the safety aspect of being only 30 feet away, and a duplex would indicate possibly a young family with kids right there.
Well, we've got the duplex shown on this side of the building envelope that is 30 feet back. I mean, that's the minimum front yard setback. We do have a little bit of flexibility to move it to the other side of the building envelope. We were trying to maximize the amount of space that's available behind the units. I don't think, I mean, if we could move these uphill, we've got a 30-foot front yard setback, but I don't think you have the ability to give us that much flexibility with a conventional subdivision. We'd prefer to reduce that front yard setback along the private road from 30 feet to 25 feet.
It's not the
Still-
private road, it's against Irish Hill Road.
Right, but if we had a little less depth here, if we didn't have to have 30 feet here, if we only needed 25, we could move the unit further over here, which we can do as is, but, you know, having that 30-foot setback relaxed upon the private road, what I'm not sure is you have the ability to do, would allow us a little more flexibility. But we can certainly look at moving this duplex a little further north in the building envelope and get that increased separation to the road that you're talking about.
So again, why can't the whole thing just shift to the north?
It
Everything.
could, that's what I'm saying, is this,
Everything.
this
All
edge,
three, though, Jeff's
All
asking
three.
you all three.
oh, there's an intermittent stream that we're trying to stay south of right here.
Trying to stay
In the
south, but what
steeps.
does that mean?
Keep the
When you say
building,
intermittent stream, is there wetland rules that need to be followed with that, or is it just a desire?
No, I mean, we are trying to maintain a buffer along the stream, even though one's not required. But, you know, if you go back, even on the other side of Thompson Road, there's a drainage way that comes down, crosses, runs parallel to Thompson Road, crosses underneath Thompson Road, runs parallel to Thompson Road for a little while, and then cuts through the Rivercrest open space. Ultimately, it ends up down here in the Rivercrest open space, and then, you know, you lose the presence of the wetlands because it's so flat up here, because the grade picks up as it drops down to the river. So there's not a requirement necessarily that we maintain a buffer from that stream, but it would really be a good idea to do so. Not to mention the steep slopes that we encounter the closer you get to the stream channel.
Because these are 2-foot contours, right?
Correct.
Yeah, so it's twice as steep as it looks.
So, and just, I think I know the answer, but it's safe to ask it anyway. Is there any way that you could put one of the three homes on the east side of the private road on the, what is that, lot 3? It's too steep?
Yeah, I mean, we're really trying to minimize the amount of
Disruption you
earthworks
do.
that we've got. Having the road on the high side lends itself to having each of those homes have a walkout basement, so we can take advantage of the road following the existing grade. And because we've got the slope from the road down to the backyard, we also have the advantage of, you know, taking 10 feet from the front of the home to the back of the home to make up for that grade change.
There's a possibility that there might be a sidewalk going in along there, which, you know, doesn't necessarily have a direct impact on traffic, but personally speaking, when you see a sidewalk and people walking, tend to slow down a little bit. And the other option to explore is landscaping to create a little bit more of a buffer. Or a fence even, yep, yeah, which can be included in landscaping, so doing like a serious hedge with a,
That goes with the site distance though on the road.
Oh, a
Not
little
necess-
picket fence to keep
Not
kids in?
necessarily.
Address your concern. According to Dave Marshall, the more driveways, the slower people drive. Remember that?
yes.
So, is there anybody else on the board with questions? Anybody in the audience? Gail, I think I saw your hand up.
Natural Resources
No,
Committee met.
no. Sorry.
The Natural
Wait,
Resources.
you better just state your name for
Oh,
the
Gail
record.
Albert, Natural Resources Committee.
Are you going to testify?
I guess, yes,
Swear or affirm to tell the whole truth, nothing but the truth in connection with any testimony you should give in
yes.
this application? Okay, thank
do.
you.
One of the things that we would concur with that you mentioned earlier, Mary, is the need for a site visit. The La Platte River is a river that has endangered species in it. It is also a river where we've tried to conserve the land on both sides of it throughout the town, and it's both opposite and adjacent to the land on the east side from Rivercrest. That is conserved. We have some concerns about the view of those buildings because they're uphill from the viewing area on the La Platte across the river. We had concerns about the steep slope to the river and the removal of brush that is anticipated in the area that is the buffer, that both would increase the possibility of runoff from stormwater and also increase the likelihood of impairing the view of the natural area that has been the important part of having that viewing place across the river. We also had concerns about, or had hoped that at the point when it's time to speak about that, that if this were to be approved, that the land to the north would be conserved and perhaps deeded to the town, as opposed to being part of the open space of the community itself, just because of its proximity to the La Platte River. And I would defer to Susan Megenberg, who I think is here, if there are other water quality issues, because she has a bit more expertise than I do around that.
Thank you. Any questions of Gail before she sits down? No. Okay. Anybody else? State your name for the record.
Susan Megenberg, Natural Resources Committee.
Do you swear or affirm to tell the whole truth and nothing but the truth in connection with any evidence you should give this evening?
I do.
Thank you. Go ahead, tell us what your concerns are.
Well, in terms of the planning of the design of the buildings, due to the proximity to the river and the steep slopes down to the river, there's a good possibility for a lot of stormwater runoff. And so we recommend as a committee to design the buildings and stormwater catchment, facilities right on site to be designed as well as can be done in terms of catching stormwater, preventing, rapid flow off those steep slopes, which could lead to a lot of erosion and deposition of sediment and nutrients into the river. So we ask that that be taken into consideration.
Great, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Anything else? Anybody else in connection with this application care to provide any testimony? Any additional questions from the board?
Yeah, Andy, I wondered if you could just address the stormwater concept, or how you think that'll be handled, like off the roofs and everything.
Yep. So we'll probably end up with about half an acre of impervious surface. So while we don't need a stormwater permit, we certainly intend to design as if we did need one. We haven't graded the site yet, but we have looked at preliminary grading. There'll most likely be a low spot in the driveway right about here, so we've got space to work with on the property line in this area, down towards the back to catch the water coming off the driveway. And we'll also incorporate, whether it's shared or house by house, most likely some type of treatment swale or bioretention area, sort of mini rain garden, to provide some filtering and some limited detention for the runoff before it's discharged to the river. Being on the river, detention isn't quite as important so long as we're providing a level of detention such that we're not creating channeling and erosion in order to get it to the river. The detention is a little less important because we're at a major discharge point already. But certainly we'll be looking at slowing down the runoff so that we're not causing erosion and providing treatment, particularly for the runoff from the road.
Do you anticipate the road to be paved or gravel or?
We haven't gotten that far yet. I know there was at least one person on the Conservation Commission who suggested that it be left gravel.
Okay. That's it.
In that case, I'm going to make a motion to continue the subdivision application to the November 1st meeting of the Development Review Board and schedule a site visit. And to do that, we all need to get our calendars out because we have to schedule it now, right? And there you go. Maybe we can do it right before.
Pretty early this time of year.
Earlier is better.
Pretty dark by
Yeah, right, they will have turned the clocks back.
first weekend in November.
Oh, okay, well, still, it's
We're
pretty.
clean, because that first weekend didn't hit yet.
How
November
about-
1st is over.
Right.
Yeah.
If we were in October.
How about, does anyone have any suggestions as to when? I'm thinking maybe Wednesday afternoon, the 25th, a week from today. 5? Is 5 okay? Does 5 work for everybody? Joanna? Sorry?
I think so.
Andy? Okay. Great, so we'll, along with the motion to continue, have a site visit at 5 PM on Wednesday, October 25th. Any discussion on that motion?
Do you guys want to see anything delineated in particular? Like where the house, well, a few of them, if you get far enough back, you're not gonna be able to see anything anyway, but at least the one on the road. Or anything else along those lines? Where the road might go? Up to you guys.
Yes, I think that would be very helpful to see where the road might go and to get also the property line. Is that what you just said?
I'd like to see the building envelope for that southernmost duplex.
The one closest to the road.
Yeah.
You guys have enough time to do that? Yep.
Before we take a vote, Miss Albert? Sorry.
Gail Albert again. One of the other things that might be helpful on a site visit would be some height indicators so that we could sort of walk on both sides of the river and see if the, what the visibility of this would be. And I know that the brush is intended to be cut so that it might be somewhat difficult, but if there were a way to be able to flag about the height indicator of the rooftops so that we know what the visibility will be from the site across the river, because that is supposed to be a wild and natural area, and it's a viewing point. So I think that would be of concern to folks.
When you say, I just have a question, it's supposed to be a wild and natural area. Is that in the town plan somewhere, that it's supposed to be a natural and wild area? Because it is private property,
Where the,
right?
She's talking about.
no, I'm talking about the other side of the
Okay.
river, which is there
Okay,
has
I'm-
been, I'm not sure if you've been there, but.
I have, I
yeah.
went by today, and I've also been to the area, so maybe I'm not understanding what you're saying.
Yeah, there's an overlook that's been
Right.
built on the other side of the river, and I
Right,
think
I've been
people,
there.
on our committee at least, were concerned that the visibility from there would be very much changed if, in fact, there were houses and yards and so forth visible from the other side.
Yeah, I understand that. So what you're asking then is to-
Just
if we have
an
a height, we
indicator
could
of what
see
the
they
building
would see.
heights would be.
So when you say that's supposed to be a natural area, you mean the viewing side?
The view, from the viewing side, yes.
From the
Right,
viewing side to
but-
the houses.
Right, but so the piece I don't get is, where does it say that when you're in that viewing area, what you're supposed to see is a natural undeveloped area? Because it is private property.
It doesn't say that, but the entire concept of having the viewing area there within a conserved area on the overlook of the river was that, in fact, it was a natural area.
But I'm just, if you're asking us to take into consideration that concept, I think, right? I don't know how, first of all, I don't see it as a standard for what we're supposed to consider in either granting or denying this application.
But might it not be useful to know as you help to define what the ultimate plan will look like?
So, so could we influence, say, tree removal?
we
Something like
can-
that? So
Yeah.
it'd be
I think so,
a
but I-
limitation of the property use.
I think we are, correct me if I'm wrong, Kate, I think we do have the power to ask for tree plans and that kind of thing, but do we have the power to say something like, even though the height limit of a house is 35 feet, that it should be limited to, say, 25 feet because of where it is?
We just interpret law, we don't make it up.
Right, that's what I'm saying.
No,
So if there's a
there's-
height limit of 35 feet and
Right.
it's on private property, how could we say, no, you can't build your house 35 feet?
Well, I do understand that, but I think, as Jeff pointed out, it might influence the kinds of requirements you set upon trimming and cutting. And we were,
Can we, I know we can do tree plants. Can we say you can't cut shrubbery that's in your private property?
You can do no cut zones, if it's warranted, and.
No cut of anything?
Yeah, you can have no cut, so, yeah, you can put no cut zones. Usually that's within like a building envelope type area, and,
What
I
about for
will-
the floodplain overlay?
yeah, so
area?
there's also some limitations on what you can move in there, so correct me if I'm wrong, but I did speak to Bart about this, and it was the removal of buckthorn and other invasives, so you could, say, this area is fine to remove invasive species, but any healthy, non-invasive trees shall remain.
but also, I mean, one of the concerns that we have had is that sometimes removal of invasive species just opens things up, and it also removes the ground cover that absorbs the stormwater. And so there could be conditions under which we, even ourselves, from the Natural Resources Committee, might recommend that even invasives not be removed.
Okay, well, I think it would be appropriate for all of us to go into the overlook and take a look at it. I agree with that. I don't know that I feel comfortable asking the applicant to build some sort of contraption that would give us a sense of how high
No,
a
don't.
house is. I think we'll make,
Okay, well,
sort of
what
try
we
to
can
make the-
do.
Huh?
We'd be grateful for what we can do.
Okay, thank
Thank
you
you.
very much, Gail. Anybody else? So I think there's a motion pending to continue and have a site visit on October 25th at 5 o'clock. Can I have a second to that?
Second,
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? None. Motion carries. Thanks.
Thank you.
Okay. The next matter on our agenda this evening is application SUB 1602. It's a subdivision application for, it's a preliminary plan review. It's the application of Snyder Homes LLC for preliminary plan approval of a 91-unit residential plan unit development. The property is located on the corner of Webster Road and Spear Street. The address is 0 Spear Street. And I know that there are folks here to give testimony about this. What I think I would do to save time is kind of go down the line and have everybody get sworn in at once. Does that make sense? See, so we don't have to keep doing it. Sort of like a naturalization ceremony.
There we go. We said a pledge?
Okay, so who anticipates giving testimony this evening? Chris, Andy, and 2 people in the back. So why don't you all come forward, say your names, and then I'll swear you all in at once, and we'll get it out of the way.
Andy Rowe, Limero Dickinson.
Chris Snyder, Snyder Homes.
Tina Scharf, wildlife consultant.
Craig Heindel, hydrogeologist with Wade Heindel Environmental.
Okay, great. You all raise your right hands. Do you all, oops, and Gail Albert, there she is.
Oh, there you go. Gail Albert, just in case.
Do you all swear or affirm to tell the whole truth and nothing but the truth in connection with any evidence you should give this evening for this application? Yes, thank you. Who wants to go first? Well, first, actually, I think I need to have a motion for partial application review, for partial review. So who wants to make that motion? And then I need to have an explanation for why it needs to be partial. Let me give it, and then we'll just cut right to the chase. I understand the applicant wants a partial review because there's issues with water supply or availability along Spear Street for Shelburne based on a situation, we'll call it, with the South Burlington, parent South Burlington-owned water tank that's on Spear Street. Do I have that right?
The one on Dorset Street.
Dorset, sorry. And that's something the applicant cannot control.
That is correct.
So now we have a motion pending for partial review. Can I have a second? And all in favor of doing a partial review? Aye, and aye. Okay, so the motion carries. We can do a partial review. I will say on the record that we might have to extend this out further because, as I understand it, the applicant has until January 4 to complete this entire application.
On
Pregnant pause.
his schedule or ours?
It's ours. It's the 6 months, right?
So you can do the partial review, do the findings for everything but water, but at this moment, the deadline is January 4.
And so the applicant might have to make another motion to extend before that point in time.
Yeah, we'll have to
Makes
work
sense?
something.
We do understand that. Obviously, we're concerned about the town and the city in hoping that they come to an agreement not only for our potential development, but also the water situation that currently exists today.
Right.
And I hope that there is a resolution
Okay.
pending.
All right. Well, we are happy to hear this on a partial basis. And it's 7:45. This is a large application with a lot of information to get through. And in discussing this with staff, we thought we would start with the subdivision planning standards and see how long it takes us to get through that process, and maybe stop there depending on what time it is. Does that make sense?
Sure. Hopefully we can answer the questions quickly and move through them as needed, and that we can get through as many items as possible, as we do have consultants here and we have people
I want everybody
involved.
who's here tonight to testify. That's my
Perfect.
goal, but I kind of sized up that they would all be part of that part of the process. So why don't you give us an overview, and then we'll start going through the standards.
I will keep my start up here very short. Thank you again for your time. Obviously, we have introduced this project before. We do have myself, Andy Rowe, Tina, and Craig here to answer any questions specific to our current application. As you know, we originally proposed this a while back and have gone through sketch plan, and we have made some adjustments to the overall plan according to the sketch plan approval that was received at the beginning of this year. The overall proposed neighborhood, we did submit our application back in July, or no, August? Was it August? It was in August. Between then and now, we have received comments from all of the town departments and committees. And that prior to sketch plan or during the sketch plan process, I did meet with most interested neighbors that were interested in meeting individually with me. We have modified the plans, obviously, to address some of the concerns from the neighbors and also from the DRB. This property is located within the Growth Area 2, which is serviced by municipal water and sewer, pending water resolution. The sewer core area has been defined within the comprehensive area for this property. And the planning that is in place for the property allows for a higher density than what we are currently proposing. There was a reduction from the original sketch plan application. The overall parcel is a 53-acre parcel of land that is on the western portion of Spear Street. It does abut other residential neighborhoods, Culmer Circle, Boulder Hill, and Lily Lane. We are proposing 3 different home types within this neighborhood. We will have single-family homes ranging from 1,800 square feet to 2,400 square feet.
Chris, do you mind if I interrupt you? Can you point out where the various homes are on your plan?
Yes.
Andy's got
his little, he gave one to me like 2 years ago, and I keep forgetting to bring it. So these are single-family homes.
Yeah, thank you.
On the northerly boundary. And then we have townhomes, which are located in the southwest portion of the project. And then we have carriage homes, which are a one-story home that does have full basements, and people do finish off the basements, but they're located sort of throughout these areas that I'm highlighting right now. So
Fair to say on the east side of the development?
on the south side, because this is
Oh, southeast side then.
southeast side. So those are the 3 different home types that we're proposing to build and have submitted. In terms of the overall open space, and there is a sheet up here. This plan shows a total of approximately 18 acres of open space. I would like to note that we have not counted these areas within the neighborhood as open space, that really the open space is defined really outside of the residential neighborhood.
Was there a reason for that, Chris?
It wasn't so much that we wanted to make it clear that we had sufficient open space to meet the requirement without counting what somebody might consider somebody's backyard.
Gotcha.
You know, there's also the buffer space along Spear Street, in between the 2 clusters of homes. We just wanted to make it clear that we met the
Yep.
requirement. And if you started to count that other space where in exceedance of the minimum. And I do have another plan, just to be clear on what the open space does encompass. So
Oh,
that's
there
just
we go.
highlighting the 18 acres, as well as the area that's not part of the 18 acres, obviously.
What kind of activities, sorry to interrupt, what kind of activities are you envisioning for the open space?
We have no plans for any activity within the open space. There's no connections, no bike paths, no walkways. There's already a path really from the end of Pearson over to Boulder Hill, but that is below the ridge line where our proposed neighborhood is. And I do think that people are using that today.
But you have proposed sidewalks all throughout the development.
There's bike paths or sidewalks throughout the neighborhood, and then there's also a bike path proposal to connect down to Spear Street. So from all the way on the northerly portion, and then throughout the neighborhood, there are paths all the way down. So it will sort of connect the to the existing Webster Road rec path.
Thank you.
There are two proposed stormwater basin areas. We have the northerly section and then a southerly pond. These will hold and contain the water from the impervious surfaces. And Andy's and Craig are gonna talk a little bit more about how those are designed and what sizing they're at. But it is designed to a 100-year storm. The regulations require us to be at a 25-year storm, but we have designed it based upon some concerns addressed by some neighbors that we would increase that. One of the things that Andy keeps reminding me about is that currently it's a golf course. There is no stormwater treatment on the property. Even though there's a pond in the southerly end, it does not contain hold stormwater. Everything is basically there to shed water as quickly as possible from the property. So the current proposal is the 100-year storm and will contain a lot of the runoff.
Chris, can I stop you right there? I recall that testimony from the last time you were in for site sketch review. I'm having trouble, just as a layperson, with that whole thing, because right now, that golf course is not impervious. It's grass, and theoretically, I could be wrong, acts like a sponge. And when you put in sidewalks and roads and all that, the roofing area, that's gonna create far more runoff than happens naturally now, I think. And for that reason, I'm having a hard time thinking, even if you do make that pond work, because I understand the southerlymost pond isn't working as a water retention vehicle, even if you make that work, I'm having a hard time thinking that that pond and the northern pond that you're proposing would be sufficient. So I guess I would have to hear from Mr. Heidendell a little bit more about that. Maybe I'm asking the question prematurely, but I do want to say I am concerned about that, and I've been thinking about other things that perhaps you might be able to do on the property that would help diffuse that potential situation and the concern of neighbors in the area.
Yeah, and we certainly, Craig will be addressing
Okay.
that, and Andy will be addressing that. I think there's also, from a layman's term, because I'm also not a stormwater engineer, is that the soil conditions it's clay, and there's rock. So
Okay.
the water
So it's running off
doesn't
anyway.
really get into the ground very deep. It moves, and there's lots of
Appreciate
drainage
that.
tile throughout the golf course already that's taking that water and exporting it off of the golf course.
Good to know. Thank you.
So that's one item, and then in terms of construction phasing, we are proposing that we will most likely come into off the northerly section and build a portion of this area and some carriage homes in our first phase in this northerly section, and then we'll do the southerly section as a second phase. We do plan to build the homes over a period of 4 years, or depending upon market conditions. So it won't be something that happens overnight. It will be a long process, and we will be there and working within the neighborhood. At this point, I would like to introduce Craig Heindel and have him address some of the hydrology and geology that we have on the property.
Thank you. My letter is in the package. It's dated August 3rd, 2017. I have a number of copies of it and a blow-up of the maps. So,
We have one dated August 4.
oh, you're right. Yep. Yes, sorry, August 4.
Thanks, Craig. So we have it,
Okay.
right?
Are there folks in the audience who would like a copy? Anybody? And let me put up the maps too. These are, this one and the one behind, I'll flip in a minute, are on the last pages of my report. So I'm a groundwater geologist and a hydrologist, been working in the area for 35 or 40 years. Very familiar with how groundwater works in Vermont and how surface water works. So the geology of this site and its relation to water, Chris pretty much nailed it. It's very shallow to bedrock, and the bedrock here is not particularly fractured, so it's going to resist infiltrating water. And then whatever superficial materials are on top of the bedrock are also quite low permeability, mostly silts and clays. So this is a site that sheds water primarily. It doesn't infiltrate water easily. The bedrock is pretty shallow in many places. In fact, we are estimating that most of the utility trenches will need to be blasted. There have been some initial explorations, not a great deal of borings, but all the initial explorations indicate that bedrock is a very shallow depth below ground surface, so the utility trenches will have to be blasted, or at least the rock removed. And blasting will probably be the method to do that. There are other methods to remove rock if the rock is soft. The hydraulic hammers that you might have seen on the end of a backhoe that go dit, 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 dit. This rock is probably too hard for that method to use, so it'll probably be blasting using explosives. The depth of the utility trenches varies from a few feet to maybe 13, help me out here, Andy, 13-ish feet is pretty, more than, some of them maybe 19 or 20 feet. No more than 13 feet. Yeah, that's what, okay, yep. The land generally slopes from east to west, from Spear Street gently to the west, and then a little bit beyond the property line it plummets down a bit. Groundwater in Vermont generally flows in the same direction that the ground slopes, and that's the case on this site here, in my judgment. There are 3 major locations where surface water that coalesces from the groundwater, which can't infiltrate into the ground, that groundwater, shallow groundwater, since it can't percolate easily, is going to coalesce into groundwater, and that's going to flow in concentrated places. And those concentrated places are, you can see on all of these maps, where's the button? So one channel is right here, is here. On my map, that's called discharge point A. The next channel is here. You can see it on the topography. You see how the contour lines make a V. So that I'm calling that discharge point B. And then discharge point C is where the current South Pond discharges over in this area. all of those discharge points are in currently existing naturally occurring swales. So the surface water is now flowing down those swales, and stormwater from this site will join that. We realized in my evaluation working with Andy on this site that there is the possibility of shallow groundwater on the site, either in the superficial material or in the upper part of the bedrock. The utility trenches are going to basically act as groundwater collectors on this site. As I said, they range from several feet to 13 feet. These are going to be trenches in the rock that will have the utility pipes, sewer and water and so on. Those sewer and water pipes will be surrounded by permeable material, and that permeable material acts what we call a preferential conduit. It acts as a groundwater collector network. And so I worked with Andy to figure out the ways to design and adjust those utility trenches, which will incidentally act as groundwater collectors to carry that groundwater to places that are away from the existing homes, particularly to the north on Pearson Drive and Colomer Circle. So, for example, there is sewer line and water line all along this part of that road, and there is a foundation drain collection system along the back of the buildings along there. That's shown in my map, my fold-out map on my report. It's the yellow zone here. That area, the utility trenches and the foundation drains will act as a collection system under that yellow area and discharge it out of discharge area A in yellow. So that part of the project will sort of be, its groundwater to a depth as much as 13 feet will be collected and sent to discharge point A. The same thing happens with the other two discharge points. So in green on my map, all of the water, the shallow groundwater in that area, it will be captured basically by the utility trenches and sent to discharge point B, as well as the discharge from the stormwater swale, from the north stormwater pond, will be sent to discharge point B. Same thing then in the red area, all of the groundwater, shallow groundwater in this area that's captured by the utility trench system and the foundation drain system, and the discharge from stormwater pond south will be discharged in that existing point discharge C. Just to look a little bit in more detail, the last map the final page there. So this is oriented differently. North is at the top on my map here. On this map, it's on the last page of my report. Just to show a little bit of the blue lines of the flow paths off property from the three discharge points. So there's discharge point A, that's yellow in the other map, that collects the groundwater from the northern part of the parcel. That goes down through an existing swale and would follow that existing swale on its way to Monroe Brook. The green area, discharge B, from the center part of the project, discharges into the head of an existing swale. That heads down to this big wetland, and that wetland eventually discharges to Monroe Brook. And then discharge C from the southern part of the parcel, and the discharge from the stormwater pond south heads into that existing swale down toward the Boulder Hill development and through that culvert and on its way, again, a tributary of Monroe Brook. So that's the basic design and collection system. The stormwater calculations, Ms. Kehoe, that you were asking about. So this project has been designed in accordance with it needs a stormwater permit. It's been designed in accordance with the stormwater procedures, and it meets those. That design done by Andy has been independently reviewed by the South Burlington independent stormwater review process that you folks have. I've looked at it also. I concur with it. So it's been reviewed by a bunch of stormwater people, and we all agree that it's in compliance with the stormwater regs. those stormwater, the result of that those calculations are that the peak discharge from this development is less than the current discharge. And that's mostly because of the retention of the components of the stormwater system. The swales, the catchments, and of course these two stormwater ponds that are acting as proper stormwater ponds. Not the south pond is not acting as a stormwater pond, as you've heard. It's just a wide place in the stream. Water, a drop of water in causes an instant drop of water out the other end. Where these basically dry stormwater ponds will, the way modern stormwater retention ponds work is they're essentially dry until a storm event. They receive the rush of water from the storm event and then slowly release that out of a small hole. It's like a bathtub with a small outlet. That's how these stormwater retention systems work. They've looked at infiltrating as much stormwater as possible, and very little is possible to infiltrate on this site. One of the principles of the current stormwater design procedure and system in Vermont is to first try to infiltrate as much as possible. Most of the soils on this site are not amenable to infiltration. There are a few little sections and they've done as much infiltration as possible, but most of the stormwater is really not amenable to infiltration into the ground. And if that were to be infiltrated, it would again be collected by the groundwater system that I've just described and then discharged eventually at one of these three discharge areas, A, B, or C. I believe that this groundwater collection system, which is, it's not the primary design, of course, of these utility trenches, but they are going to act that way. That the groundwater collection system is certainly not going to make anything worse regarding the apparent problems that some of the folks along Pearson Drive and Collimer Circle and so on have talked about. It's not going to make it worse, and it's very likely to make it better, because right now, water coming off the north end of the golf course is just uncontrollably going where that little, where the ground slopes. Some of which may be ending up toward the backyard of the homes on Pearson Drive. The foundation drains along the back of these units, the yellow area in my map, and the utility trench in that road is going to collect that water and send it away from those homes into an existing swale there. So I really think that things are going to improve, or certainly not get any worse regarding water relative to the existing homes.
How do we know that of the three swales, the natural swales that you have identified, will be able to handle any additional capacity? I know you're saying there shouldn't be much additional capacity or additional water flow because of the bedrock and all of that. I just have a hard time buying that completely when you're adding so much impervious surface to an already impervious, I understand, situation, but I'm just really concerned that you're going to be adding more water and if you don't have to increase the swales, great, but I just worry. I'm just thinking that Monroe Brook is going to be handling a lot of extra stormwater, and can it handle that? Or is that going to, you know what I mean?
All of the water that is now falling on the golf course is going to Monroe Brook, down these three swales.
Right.
And it's going at a fairly rapid clip because it can't infiltrate easily into the golf course. So I understand your question and your concern. That what's different about this site compared to most sites is that we are comparing something that is relatively impermeable now.
Right.
If this were an open field with 10 feet of sand, that'd be a very different situation. It's not that. It's basically an open field with tight soils, clay-rich soils and shallow to bedrock, both of which don't infiltrate very much water. So there will be probably slightly more volume of water sent to these swales, but not an increase in the highest flow velocity or the highest flow rate. And it's the flow rate that is the biggest concern about downstream structures, culverts and roadside ditches. So, but again, I don't believe this is going to be an impact on the downstream folks because of the peak discharge rate after this stormwater system is installed will be less than the current peak discharge rate.
Where's the utility trench going on the north side of the property? The northernmost utility trench?
Right down, well, there's a utility trench down the middle of the road, and then there's a foundation drain. So each of these buildings has an individual foundation drain that goes to the back, to the north, and then there's a collection pipe that collects that foundation drain and
Okay.
goes around like
And
that.
then the roof drains, the rain drains, rain gutters, they empty into that foundation drain, or they just empty out into the, where they empty out?
They will empty out onto,
So one of the comments that we had from the city of South Burlington, as Craig mentioned, was to maximize the infiltration in the really marginal soils wherever we could. And the areas of the marginal soils are really right in this area. And in addition to some of these homes, we took the rooftop runoff from all of these homes here, which will be guttered in the back, put it into an infiltration trench, where the infiltration trench will be equal to the length of the contributing rooftop. So if your house is 60 feet long, you've got an infiltration trench that's 60 feet long. But knowing that the soils are really marginally permeable, those will be at a single elevation. So if those fill up, they'll act as a level spreader, which would be the same thing we would be doing if they weren't there to begin with. We'd want to take the rooftop runoff and disperse it so that it has an opportunity to infiltrate, be retained by the vegetation, what Mary was describing on the existing golf course, that it's like a sponge. You know, there's varying scales of how that sponge, how the soil and the vegetation is retaining the water, but at least we want to give it the opportunity to infiltrate. If it doesn't infiltrate, it acts as that level spreader. And then the runoff from the back parts of the homes, if it doesn't infiltrate, would continue where that runoff is going now. The front part of the homes is coming to the collection system in the street.
Okay.
So because this land, I'm thinking about the application we were just talking about before we called this one up. And you were talking about doing some rainwater planting and landscaping. But am I right in thinking that because this particular land is so impervious, doing that kind of landscaping would not be effective?
As Craig said, you know, we've got the soils up here, which are really marginally permeable. The rest of it is all mapped as Virgin's clay and the shallow depth to bedrock. You know, where those would be effective is where they would get into imported soils and then find their way into the preferential conduit, the bedding around those utility pipes. What we've really focused on here, you know, we do have grass swales, we have rooftops that are connected, we have those infiltration trenches that I spoke of, but really the focus here, because of the two existing drainage ways that we're discharging most of the runoff to.
A and B?
Right. B and C. A is really picking up just the footing drain discharge from those homes there. So there's a small amount of runoff that'll be discharged from those footing drain collection systems. The lion's share will be discharged at points A and B, the two stormwater basins. But I guess just kind of circling back to the question you had made about understanding the difference between the development characteristics and the runoff characteristics for the existing golf course. The existing golf course is grass. There's about an acre, believe it or not, about an acre of impervious surface just with the cart paths. It is grass, but it's intensively managed. You've got some areas of long grass, but you've got an awful lot of areas where the grass is really intensively managed to a fairly short depth. There's drainage throughout the course. They don't want puddles. People don't want to walk through puddles. It's not a great drainage system, but there is drainage throughout the golf course in order to get that water off the course as soon as possible so that play can resume. as Craig said, you know, the existing pond, water in is really water out. So getting back to the two stormwater ponds, the focus is really, in addition to providing the treatment component, which is required by the, both the town standards and the state standards, the focus has really been on reducing the rate of flow that's coming out of there, so that we're not overwhelming downstream drainage. We're making it better. We're reducing that peak flow significantly, actually. For the 1, the 10, and the 25-year storms, we're reducing it by about 50%. It declines from 50% a little bit as you approach that 25-year storm. For the 100-year storm, we're reducing it by about 1/3. And we've been fairly conservative in our runoff calculations, where we're modeling the golf course as if it was a lawn area, not as an intensively managed area where you've got slightly higher runoff in the areas where the grass is short. We're treating it sort of apples to apples, which isn't quite accurate, as if it was the lawn areas of the homes, around the homes and the lots that are being proposed. And again, you know, I want to emphasize that we're discharging to the 2 existing drainage points, but substantially reducing that peak flow. And it's the peak flow that is really what is the scouring event. You know, one of the design criteria that the state has is based upon the 1-year storm, the channel forming event. It's that slug of runoff that we get from a 1-year storm, 2.1 inches of runoff over a 24-hour period. But that slug of runoff that, you know, flushes out any sediment that might have accumulated in the channel and really scours to a point where it's the channel forming event. It's not big enough where it's getting out of that channel and into the adjacent floodplain if there is one available. And again, that's those smaller storms, the 1, the 10, and the 25, are where we haven't just matched the existing peak flow, we've cut it by 50% in order to make a substantial difference in the amount of runoff in terms of peak rate that's running off this site and onto the adjacent properties. And just to kind of follow up, in the staff comments, there were review comments provided by South Burlington. We also submitted our application to the state in June. That state discharge permit has been issued. I'll provide a copy to Kate. But if there's any other questions on stormwater, I'd be happy to address them.
I have a couple questions that are kind of related. You mentioned there'll be blasting likely for utility trenches. Will there be other blasting for foundations and things like that? And then secondly, does the blasting ever have a side effect of increasing permeability of the site just by fracturing?
So there will be blasting for, in addition to the utilities, for the basements. There may also be blasting for the roadway, just because of the depth of gravel, and I'll let Craig address the rest of it.
The blasting technology these days uses small blasts very efficiently applied, and that's because blasting materials are very expensive, and the procedure to do blasting is very expensive. So they do it as efficiently as possible. So the days of 40 years ago of cowboy blasters setting off giant charges and shot rock up in the air and, you know, perforating nearby cars, that's pretty much gone. Some of you may remember that. So it's done very efficiently. The energy from the blast and the way the blast is designed is intended and functions by creating fractures out into the hole in which the blast is going. There's no benefit to sending energy into the solid mass of the rock. The purpose of the blasting is to peel off 5 or 10 feet to go into the free zone where that blasted rubble can then be dug out by a front-end loader or some excavator, and then they move up a few more feet and design the blast so that energy goes into that newly created free zone. So there's no benefit. It's inefficient to send energy deep into the rock. So it's not done that way. Our firm has evaluated a number of blasting projects, both residential and large quarries around, and we don't see significant fracturing more than a few feet, a small number of feet, less than 10 usually, into the rock. So we don't expect this to have any sort of large-scale, wholesale change to the permeability of the rock. The rock that is going to be left at the bottom of the utility trenches is going to be very similar in its low permeability to the rock that is now, if you peeled back the grass at the golf course, and you could see it right there. So no, I do not expect a significant increase in permeability of the rock after the blasting has been done.
Question, what would the effect on the north side of the property, let me back up. So there's all kinds of drainage tiles in the golf course right now doing whatever they do to try to keep the puddles away so people can golf, get that. I understand the swales and the ponds, I get that. It's to the north side where you look and you have the exit point not far from the other property lines. My question is, how effective would a shallow berm be running right along that northern property line just to help ensure that you don't get residential runoff going into those neighbors' yards? I mean, I look at residential runoff to be a little bit different than golf course runoff. What are your thoughts?
Well, let me just hit on the drainage area to begin with, I guess. You know, right now, this is the high spot.
Yep.
That is the wooded, sort of shows on here, but the golf course comes in, and I think this is the third hole coming out. So you've got this island of woods that are there now.
Yeah, I get that.
So the high point is right in that wooded area. So right now, if you draw a line back this way and come back to the two houses along Spear Street, that area right now is draining towards Collimer Circle.
Yeah, I get that.
We're intercepting the majority of that because everything from the front of these homes
Yep, utility
is
trench
coming
catches that.
toward the street. So we're decreasing the amount of runoff that's coming there. We do have a little bit more impervious area because
Right,
we've got
you got-
more than just the
you got
cart
the
paths. We've
roofs.
got the back half of the homes.
Right.
But we've also got a catch basin right here that is picking up the runoff from this triangle here. So the only area that's draining there is really the back half of those lots, including the
Exactly.
back half of the homes.
Right.
So I guess my first point is we substantially reduced the amount of runoff, the area that's draining there.
I get that.
As far as building, I mean, I
berm.
haven't walked that to see what type of access you would need. I mean, you would need to do a little bit of clearing if you were to build a berm in there.
Right. If you're talking like a 6-inch or 12-inch berm, then it just eliminates all that potential runoff from the roofs back. Because I know there's not a lot. Everything else is goodness, but then all of a sudden, everything gets channeled out and those other existing homes are, that's what I'm questioning, the effectiveness of that.
Theoretically effective. I would say that if Andy and I and Chris could put our heads together on this question, because from looking at the tree line, I think that is wooded there. So a better spot, and it may be possible to combine what I'm about to mention as part of the foundation drains collection pipe, is at the northern edge of the very small backyard lawns that slope northward down from these houses before they hit the tree line, to put a very shallow, either a berm or a collection swale.
Okay, great.
And send that water to the north.
Perfect, thank you.
We need to talk about that, but I would rather not have anything in the trees right along the property line. Let's
Sure.
leave those trees there and have something, a simple collection
Okay.
pathway along the backyards. If we'll have to look at the slopes there, but I think we could do it. It may be a split flow. Some of those northern ones may flow, or the western ones may flow to the west, and then the eastern ones may flow to the catch basin that he just mentioned.
Great. Quick question on the catch basin. Is this the type of like a shallow angled catch basin so you don't need to have a wrought iron fence around it?
No, it would be just like one that's in the street.
Okay. Oh, okay.
And that catch basin is taking the water from that area that used to run So the water that's coming off of this area that used to continue along those back lot lines is being piped out to the street and ends up over here in the stormwater
Okay,
pond.
about the pond, the drainage, to catch the pond on the south end. Is that retention pond going to have a fence around it, or is it a shallow enough spec that it doesn't need that?
It doesn't, it's not proposed to have a fence around it. We talked about that with Chris Robinson, and
Okay.
he wasn't advocating for a fence.
Good.
We've designed all the side slopes on the ponds to be 4-on-1, so 4 feet for every 1 vertical foot, trying to keep those
Okay.
manageable, not only for maintenance, but also less steep so that they're less of a hazard. I mean, anytime you've got standing water, it's a potential hazard, but we've tried to minimize that.
Okay, thank you.
I had a question. I know I saw there's some seed specs for conservation mix and also for the stormwater pond, seed mix. And it made me think, have you thought about, for both stormwater and wildlife habitat, limiting the amount of lawn throughout the development to where maybe some of the broader open spaces have tall grasses, and would that be beneficial to stormwater and wildlife?
Yep, we have thought about that. That was actually something we had talked about with the Conservation Committee. On the landscaping plans, we had incorporated in some of the areas that are currently open, annual mow areas,
Okay.
and those are Yep. So there's, it's kind of hard to see, but there's an edge of the annual mowing area that comes along here. So this area in here, this area isn't one, but then if you go to the next plan, the area on the interior here, behind the lots would be one as well. And then the area behind the townhouses around the stormwater pond, and then everything to the south as well.
Boulder Hill, you mentioned that the stormwater pond's going to drain to the existing culverts through Boulder Hill. And I assume you've done the engineering that it's going to be less water going there versus more because of the discharge rate of the pond?
Right, the rate is being reduced substantially. Again, for the 1, the 10, and the 25-year storms, the peak rate that's going there now is going to be cut by about half. And for the 100-year storm, it's being cut by about 1/3.
So you might actually see an improvement in Boulder Hill.
Yes, and I mean, the other intent is with the stormwater pond releasing that water at a slower rate, you won't get that scouring velocity that tends to flush all the stuff out of the gully, the sticks, the leaves, the small stones that are being caused by the erosion from that higher flow coming off the site now.
I'd like to hear from Tina. It's Tina, right? About tree plan, and also, did have also questions about landscaping. I don't know if that's... Yeah. Okay, so we'll talk, Tina's trees, right? Your trees, no? Wildlife, oh, I confused the two, sorry.
They're close.
Yeah. Yeah, well, so, but why don't we hear from Tina so that we can make sure that we can get everybody in who's come tonight to testify, is that okay?
Tina Sharp, I'm a wildlife biologist and consultant, and Andy, did the DRB get the copy of the memo that I sent on September 14th, 2016?
I don't remember it.
Thought Andy might know the answer to that question. Andy? Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't hear. Sorry. I actually didn't have, I gave testimony at 2 meetings ago
Yep.
that was more general, and I came tonight more to answer people's questions. So I don't know if you want me to recap what I'd already said or what I wrote in the memo.
I don't think we got your,
Yeah, the memo you guys got, the sketch plan,
is the one.
you've already seen it, so.
Okay.
There's a don't know if you can find
Yeah,
it quickly
I don't
from
have
that.
it because I didn't bring, by accident, didn't bring my old Quinny stuff. We didn't get it in the, right. That's okay, we're good.
I have one copy, but do you want to look at
No,
it?
hang on to it, it's fine.
So I'm not sure what you'd like me to do, whether you'd like me to recap what
Recap would be good.
Okay. So it is primarily golf course, which we've been talking about, which is not good wildlife habitat for a variety of reasons, mostly because the grass is short, and so even little rodents and things can't really live there. They can't find cover. They use a lot of pesticides, so there's not good insectivore food there. So, and there's really no cover for larger animals, and there's not even really any forbs for deer, because deer don't eat grass. They eat broadleaf plants that are, like clover, that are mixed into grass. So there's really nothing going on there from a wildlife point of view, with a possible exception of a few nesting birds in those existing trees. There is to the west, well, could you go back to that first with the top of lines that shows the hole? Yeah, that's good, thanks. So to the west, you can see it, where's your little pointer? My hand shakes a lot, I apologize. This part is old field that's been growing up. I think it used to be a fairway, but it hasn't been mowed in a really long time. It's filling in with mostly honeysuckle. So it is an old field, which is actually can be a really rich habitat, but unfortunately it's mostly honeysuckle. But I expect that there are some rabbits and things in there that, say, a red fox might be interested in eating or whatever. So there's a little bit of probably food in there for turkeys and foxes and those sorts of animals. The rest of that is woodland, kind of there. And the woodland, particularly on this flatter area in here where you can see the top of lines are very spread out, doesn't have good, what we would call vertical structure. So there's not a lot of shrubbery, there's not a lot of large woody debris there. So you can stand in those woods and look a long distance. So it means not a lot of cover for small animals and shy animals. Not a lot of nesting habitat for birds that nest close to the ground. A lot of forest interior songbirds actually nest fairly close to the ground, so they need that structure to nest in. So it's kind of limited in that way from a wildlife habitat point of view, and that's because of deer. Shelburne has an overabundance of deer, as you probably know, so I don't need to tell you about that. What it does have that's good is some mast trees, shagbark, hickory, northern oak, which create mast for, say, turkeys love acorns, and deer, everybody eats acorns, actually. So there are some mast trees there. And there's also the possibility, this is on the plus side of the wildlife, the possibility that the northern long-eared bat may have some roosting trees in that area. Now, the northern long-eared bat, you maybe heard about in other applications. It's endangered, and there are regulations that the Vermont Fish and Wildlife Department hasn't finalized, but basically no tree cutting during the summer, which is no problem for Chris, and that's correct, yeah. So in other words, you wouldn't be cutting down a tree that has a bat roosting in it. You'd cut it down in the winter when the bat was hibernating, or bats. So that's cool. That's all right. I guess there is a trail, and I don't know, actually, maybe you know, Andy, where that trail is that people walk on through these woods, and that belongs to the town, I guess. There's a town, it's off of Long Meadow Drive, and it comes off Pearson. Okay. So that's a disadvantage for this area because it's bringing not only people, but probably people with dogs, and dogs are always bad for wildlife. Even if they're not running free, they leave a lot of their scent. So I imagine that during the day that there's not a lot of wildlife activity in there other than, squirrels and small things like that, like rabbits and squirrels, because of that human activity. And also because this piece of wood, so I'll talk about it in sort of a larger scale now, the landscape scale. this is the woodland, more or less. This is taken from the Natural Resources Atlas from Vermont Fish and Wildlife and the Agency of Natural Resources. And these habitat blocks are not very accurate, unfortunately, but, you know, it was done on a very large scale, so, you know, I'm sure somebody worked very hard at it, but it's not particularly accurate. And before, I think there was a question about whether this was one habitat block or two habitat blocks, and the Conservation Committee wanted to connect them and call it one habitat block, and that's fine. It's very narrow there, but it is wooded, and it's in that area that's very steep that you can see with it on the topo lines. So whether it's one habitat block or two habitat blocks is not so much in question. The problem becomes is that there's already a lot of existing, and I have, if people want, I have smaller pieces, smaller maps if you want to look at them. It might be easier to see. Thank you, Andy. Boulder Hill, then the Pearson Drive and Colomer Circle, and I think is this called Long Meadow in here? I'm not sure. And then there's Juniper Ridge up here. There's a lot of existing development that has made incursions into this woodland. You know, this was all wooded. So this was a much bigger wooded area. But it's been hemmed in on all sides in a way. I mean, there's some field here, so it's a little open there still, but it's really cut off from other habitat blocks. And mostly what would be really helpful would be if Boulder Hill wasn't there, and then it could kind of connect with, no offense anybody, but you know, it's just the way, it cut off that access to this larger woodland down here where the La Platte River flows through. And so in thinking about, in terms of connectivity in Shelburne, I started to look at the whole town and realized that this was really kind of isolated, but that if you looked at, and I looked at the other habitat block drawings, and they were all really inaccurate, so I started to add in some connections that were really there. So the orange parts are forested. And so this part that is sort of dappled is a wetland and an old field, which can be used by, like, bobcats are very happy to go through wetlands and old fields where they can kind of sneak between one shrub and the next shrub. So there actually is a connection all the way over from the La Platte River Park and wildland there, except for, well, they can go under the La Platte River Bridge, and bobcats do that, have been known to do that, and we've had satellite radio-collared bobcat that used to den behind rice lumber that did that would go under that bridge. And then they can get all the way over into this quarry, or behind the quarry, and then they're almost at Shelburne Pond. So from a connectivity point of view, the town where the real connectivity is here. And unfortunately, this piece of woodland is kind of cut off from everything else. There's all field here, a really long trip over to Shelburne Pond from there, and then all the existing development on a lot of different sides. So the question becomes is how much wildlife usage would change if the application for the development was approved and the development happened. And I certainly could say that while there's blasting, that will probably deter wildlife from, you know, coming around. I would think, my guess is that a lot of the wildlife activity that does occur here, for those animals that can kind of sneak through Boulder Hill and kind of sneak around through here, is probably mostly at night when there wouldn't be that noise going on. But once the construction is finished, I think the animals that are using that area are already adapted to housing, because they already have a lot of housing that they're having to negotiate through to get to that point. So I guess that's all I want to say, in case.
What about dogs, though? You were saying that dogs keep wildlife away. I'd imagine that with the sale of some of these homes, there'd be a number of dogs.
And I think there was an agreement that there would be no unleashed dogs in the open area. Did we talk about that? Yeah. And this is my soapbox. I have to apologize, but dogs are like the worst. And for wildlife. And because of that trail, I don't know, I'm sure a lot of people walk on that trail with their dogs, and it would be great if the town could stop that, but I know dogs are, I always call them the holy cow of the United States, because nobody ever wants to, be told that they can't bring their dog somewhere. So that's hard, but it would help. It would definitely help, and would help anywhere in town. It would help in the La Platte River Park, and it would help in that Shelburne Bay Park. Any place their dogs, they leave their scent. If nothing else, they leave their scent. And the other part of it is, if you have a law that says, I don't know what your ordinances say, but if it says dogs should be under control at all times, that doesn't work, because people think that they can control their dogs when they really don't have any control of their dogs. And I've had firsthand experience with that. As a wildlife biologist, I was over on the Lake Iroquois Park there in Williston, doing a wildlife habitat assessment, actually. And this dog came bounding over to me, and the owner was calling it, Rover, 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 come here. And the dog was completely ignoring that person. And there was a sign there that said, your dog should be under control at all times. And this dog was not under control. So I'll stop talking about that now. Anyway, it is important.
Questions of Tina about the wildlife? Thanks a lot for coming. Appreciate it.
Absolutely, my pleasure.
Yeah, well, nobody raised their hand when did you have questions of Tina?
Not of Tina,
Okay.
I had some of the hydrologists that we didn't have enough.
Right. I wanted to get all of the witnesses in, and then I think that's it. So come on up, Gail, and ask your questions of, Andy?
Just wanted to make note that we do have Roger Dickinson here.
Oh, I'm sorry. Did we swear him in?
Nope,
Okay,
he wasn't
came in
here at
late.
the start.
Oh.
He came in a little,
Okay.
Traffic.
he didn't
All right.
think we were going to be moving as quickly as we
Okay,
were
thank
tonight.
you.
So if you want to get into traffic,
Yeah, I do
He's
want to get into
available as
traffic
well
this evening.
next
Let's
time,
let Gail ask her question of Mr. Heindel, and then we can go to traffic.
One of the questions that came up from members of our committee, with your description of using the infrastructure as the permeable place for the water to be able to flow, are your utility pipes for sewer in that same, would that be in that same ditch? And if there were, in fact, a sewer pipe break in your drainage system, what would be the implications of that for something like Monroe Brook or for any waterway?
sure. So the whole reason we're putting utilities in the ground is to get one type of media, or either carry something to the homes or carry something away from it, whether it's electricity or sewer. So there are sewer pipes that will be installed. They're tested, they're low pressure air tested prior to construction, or excuse me, at the time of construction. They're lamped, and you pull a mandrel, which is an object 95% of the inside diameter of the pipe. That's done at 30 days after. Shelburne is somewhat unique in that they require video cammering the lines before they go into service, and then Chris Robinson has the right to request that again at the end of the warranty period. There always is the potential for a pipe to break. That's certainly not something that's planned for. The water that's moving through these, the preferential conduit, the bedding material, the permeable bedding material around the pipes, is permeable, but it's not like the water or whatever might be contained within that conduit. So if there was a break, more than likely, instead of having the sewage leak out, you're going to have the groundwater leak in. There's no pressure on the inside of that pipe, so it's lower pressure than the area around it. Chances are the groundwater head is going to be built up in that trench to some depth, forcing the water through the preferential conduit around the outside of the pipe. It's a preferential conduit, but it's not totally free and open. So instead of sewage coming out, you're more than likely to have groundwater coming in, and that is one of the things that Chris Robinson is not fond of, hence the reasons for the Ridge's construction specifications, the testing, the lamping, the video camera. And I'm not sure how frequently he inventories his system, but I believe he's always on the lookout for inflow and infiltration, that groundwater getting into the collection system, because there's no need for it, number one, and it drives up the operation costs all across the board, from pump station operation and maintenance to the treatment plant operation. So while, you know, he can't find a pinhole in the system that might be leaking or taking on groundwater necessarily, he is constantly looking out for those situations and looking to remedy them.
Thank you. Gail, did you have any more questions?
I apologize, I did not swear in, but I do have a question on
Water? Pardon?
Yes.
Oh. All right, come forward and state your name, please.
My name is George Mills.
Are you a neighbor, George?
I am a butter.
Yep, okay. You swear or affirm that any testimony you give in connection with this application will be the whole truth and nothing but the truth?
It will be,
Okay,
yes.
thank you. Do you have a question of Mr. Heindel? Is that,
I do, and of the design,
okay,
my property is close to the point on there, I guess. And having lived there for a long time, I would say there's a discharge point towards Column or Circle too. We call that number D, or letter D. Quite a lot of water goes through there. By the open space shifting down to the west versus where it was along the property lines of the homeowners in Column or Circle, that has pushed the envelope of all the buildings closer. I learned today that there's an infiltration part of the plan. I didn't understand that before, for all those homes next to the development. And I'm pretty concerned that there's going to be not only additional groundwater because of that coming towards the development, but also maybe additional surface water if it actually goes above. I'm glad that there's a catch basin potentially there. Whether it can actually capture all the water that's coming off there, I'm very concerned about that. The high point is in the middle there. If that whole set of housing was back where it was originally or closer to that, I think the runoff would very much go towards that other discharge point, and I can't remember what that was, A maybe. Right now, I think there is a D, and I think the housing, the way it's designed, may be exacerbating that even more. And I think I was thinking maybe Mr. Goodrich, if I have the name right, might be able to attest to the amount of water that comes through there at some times, and maybe some of the other neighbors.
did you have a question for either Andy
So
or
my
Mr.?
question is, that
Yep.
doesn't appear to have been taken into account, and was it?
So
and-
you
and
need
how was
you
it
need to
taken
be
into
close to the
account?
mic when you ask the
Oh.
question.
Was that area, what I'm calling discharge D, taken into account, and how was it taken into account? Because there's a tremendous amount of water that flows through there, I think.
So we were made aware from talking with the homeowners along Column or Circle that there was an issue with water coming off of this area and running along their rear yards and the rear lot line and into their yards. That was the purpose of the catch basin here, so that we're catching the runoff that's coming off this area and diverting it away from that so that it's not continuing on down. And as we talked about previously, we'd be happy to look at, you know, we are reducing the amount of drainage area that's making its way down to this area, but we can certainly look at constructing a berm or a swale in order to make sure that the runoff, you know, in these three lots in particular is being directed this way and not, you know, in a northerly direction into the backyards of the homes along Column or Circle.
I think when you look at that, the topography is such that it comes back this way a little bit, towards this, what I'm calling the discharge point there. So it's not just this, what is that, the eastern, northeastern portion. It goes all the way down towards the green that comes back. So I think it's a larger area than you've taken into account. And I also think if the houses move back a little bit, it would solve the problem quite a bit with respect to discharge and flow.
Thank you, Mr. Heindel. If you add to that, and then we'll move on to traffic, I think.
I would just add that I think between the proposed catch basin and the suggestion of a either collection berm or swale along the western, along the northern edge, that should address this. And just a brief comment on this infiltration area that Mr. Mills just heard about tonight. That infiltration area is going to be, I think, within the collection system of the utility trenches. And so it will infiltrate very briefly, and then that water will join the water that is captured by the utility trench backfill and go wherever that is going in the proposal, which is not toward Mr. Mills' plot.
I'd just like to go on record as saying one thing with regard to swales, trenches versus some type of a pipe conveyance or otherwise. There's been a number of situations in town where neighborhoods have been designed with swales and, you know, ditches, for lack of a better term, and they're great for a while, but over time, people change their lawns around, they, you know, they put gardens in, they change the topography, and if they're not maintained properly, they don't work. So I happen to live in a neighborhood that has a big problem with a swale that's been filled in over the years that is causing a big problem. So I just would like to say that my preference would be to do something that's going to give you a really positive conveyance of the water if you're going to try to intercept it and get it to the west. I'm not disagreeing with you, Jeff, that it's got to be dealt with, but the long-term viability of a swale is questionable.
Understood. It's easy to fill in with lawn clippings, leaves, Christmas trees.
Yes.
And I think that's one of the reasons why statewide the developments that now have stormwater permits, that stormwater permit has an annual inspection by a PE. And these swales will be part of the stormwater system that is supposed to be inspected and evaluated on an annual basis with a written report. So that hopefully this system will not suffer the same sort of lack of maintenance that many older systems do that don't have that annual stormwater inspection requirement.
Agreed. I happen to be in one of those older neighborhoods that is not permitted.
Well, if I understand it, there's only, in addition to what Mr. Pauza was recommending earlier for a berm, and you, Mr. Heindel, were recommending that get connected to the system to be pointed out toward through a piping system.
It could, yes.
And then the only other swale that's part of the existing design is that one that's, if I understand correctly, so please correct me if I'm wrong, between the northernmost homes that are east-facing and Spear Street? Isn't there a swale built in there? Is that right? Yes, right in there, yeah. Is that right, or is that a catch basin? Okay, sorry. All right, that's right. All right, thank you. Just wanted that clarification.
I'm looking at the contours there, and it's pretty flat, and it doesn't take much to interrupt something that's draining on 0.5% or less. It takes not much, you know. Somebody.
I should have mentioned as well, we've got a catch basin here, and a catch basin here with a high point in between, so that area is being split.
Yep.
Everything that makes it into either one of those catch basins comes back to the stormwater system in the street and the stormwater pond.
Yep. Yep. And I realize that, you know, grass treatment is the way to go as far as treating stormwater, but to the neighbors that live on the downstream side of that, there's a potential problem when you're trying to treat with a grass line swale, so.
Right, and really the intent of those two catch basins is, I mean, the natural grade there is kind of shedding in both ways once those home sites are built up. So, you know, regardless, we needed to pick up the runoff
Right.
in those 2 points rather than let it continue on. So, but we will
Agreed.
certainly look, as we talked about, with Mr. Pazza is doing something along those additional rear yards.
'Cause it's pretty flat down through there, so. The proposed contours anyways, so.
All right, Thank you very much. Let's move on to, wait, do we have a water question? Yeah. Mike, name, right hand up.
Don Rendell.
Do you swear or affirm that any testimony you should give in connection with this application will be the whole truth and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Are you going to give any testimony or just ask questions?
Asking a question primarily.
thank you.
Relating to the water discharge pathway A, the most northernmost pathway off, kind of a two-part question. The current flows of water in that pathway now compared with the proposed flows after construction, will there be more water going down that pathway or less? And if there's more, will there be some similar way to slow that as there would be out of the two ponds?
There'll be less, and it's primarily a function of the reduction of the drainage area that's going to that point. As I described earlier, there's a fairly large area that picks up part of that wooded island in the middle of the golf course, plus the golf course itself, extending back to the two catch basin areas we were just talking about before, and that's being substantially reduced where it's just picking up the back of the lots on the north end of the street, butting up to Collimer Court. So there's a substantial reduction in the amount of area that's draining there, and although we are adding the back of the rooftops on some of those lots, it's more than offset by the substantial reduction in the sheer area of the land that's draining to that point.
Okay, so it's 9 o'clock. We're going to end this meeting at 10. What is the feeling of the board with respect to whether we go into traffic or take a seventh inning stretch?
I'm up for a stretch.
Hey, stretch?
5-minute stretch.
5-minute stretch, and then we'll go to traffic. So we'll reconvene at 9:05. At least, we're going to talk. And it's Mr. Dickinson, yes? Why don't you come forward and go through the routine? Can you state your name for the record?
Okay, I'm Roger Dickinson.
You raise your right hand. You solemnly swear that any testimony you give in connection with this application will be the whole truth and nothing but the truth?
I do.
All right, go ahead. Tell us about your traffic study.
Good evening. I'm Roger Dickinson, and for those who may not be familiar with me, I am a professional traffic operations engineer and a registered PE in Vermont. And transportation engineering has been the focus of my practice for the last 30 plus years, since 1985. So my work in this project was to prepare a traffic impact study that looks at the potential traffic impacts with regards to traffic congestion and traffic safety. We have prepared a report, which I believe is part of your packet, dated July 3rd of this year. It presents the background traffic volumes on Spear Street. It estimates the trip generation of the project and the directions that the trips will travel in during the morning and afternoon peak hours. The afternoon peak hour on Spear Street is the higher of the two, as you might already know. So that's really the hour that we focus on in regards to traffic congestion impacts. The report examines traffic congestion conditions at the two off-site intersections at Spear Street and Allen Road, and also Spear Street and Webster Road to the south. Both those intersections were found to operate at level of service C. Levels of service, as you may, again, be familiar with, but for those who are not, they range from A to F. It's like a school grade. You know, A is the best level of service, little or no traffic congestion. F is essentially a traffic jam, a lot of traffic congestion. So we generally design intersections and roads in urban areas for a level of service C or D in some cases at some of the more major intersections. Here we have level of service C at both Webster Road and at Allen Road, north and south of the project. two project accesses, Street A and Street B, onto Spear Street will operate at level of service B, boy, and which is a very good level of service for those streets. So we really don't project that there will be significant traffic impacts with regards to traffic congestion. Traffic conditions will remain pretty much the way they are today, with a little added impact from this project. We also examined traffic safety. Traffic safety in this area, Spear Street is a 35-mile-an-hour roadway, two-lane road with 3 to 4 foot wide paved shoulders on both sides. There are no high crash locations on Spear Street in this area, but the report does include a summary of where the crashes have occurred over the last 5 years along Spear Street. And they're pretty well evenly spread out along the entire length of Spear Street. The large majority of those crashes are just minor crashes, property damage, vehicle damage, no injuries. 21 out of the 26 crashes on Spear Street and 11 out of the 12 crashes on Webster Road were just property damage crashes only. There was a crash on Spear Street at Barstow Road that did involve a bicyclist who was injured. None of the crashes involved pedestrians. This project will actually improve conditions for pedestrians and bicyclists in this immediate area by constructing the bike path along Spear Street down to Webster Road, where it connects with the existing bike path. One of our key issues or concerns that we always look at with regards to developments such as this are site distances at the new entrances or driveways or streets onto the existing streets. In this case, the Street A, Spear Street intersection, as well as the Street B, Spear Street intersection. Street A on the north end has excellent site distances, basically over 1,000 feet north and south. And these are, basically I went out and field measured the site distances. We measure site distances by, based on a 3.5 foot high driver eye height. Now, that doesn't sound like much, but when you're sitting in a car, your eye height is lower than what you are when you're standing. So that's 3.5 feet, and that car is waiting to exit from a side street like Street A. And we're looking to see an object that's coming that's also 3.5 feet high. Most cars are higher than that. The roof line on most cars is at least 4 feet, 4.25 feet. But you have to see enough of that car in order to actually identify it. And the other nice thing about using 3.5 feet on both ends, and this was a relatively recent change in site distance measurements practice, is that if I can see that other car, and that other car can see me too. Okay, so it's a mutual thing. So you use 3.5 feet on both, exiting the side street, and the vehicle that's approaching that side street. So that's quickly how we measure site distances in this case, at least intersection site distances. So Street A, we have over 1,000 feet both directions, 35 miles an hour. The recommended site distance is 385 feet. If we allow for a nominal 5 mile an hour over the speed limit, that's 440 feet, okay, of recommended site distance. At Street B, site distances to the south extend all the way to Webster Road and a little bit beyond. And because Webster Road is basically a four-way stop intersection, or a three-way stop, I should say. That is, you know, more than sufficient for that direction. That is about 600 feet between Street B down to Webster Road. To the north, we have this crest in the hill, right opposite the golf course parking lot. And cars coming south come over the crest of that hill, and they become visible at a point that is 480 feet north of this proposed intersection location. So again, if they're traveling 35 miles an hour, 385 feet is the recommended sight distance. If they're traveling over the speed limit at 40 miles an hour, then that recommended sight distance increases to 440 feet. In this case, we actually have sufficient sight distance at 480 feet to maintain safe conditions, even if oncoming southbound traffic is exceeding 40 miles an hour, up to approximately 45 miles an hour. And I know the police department expressed a concern about sight distances, and I wanted to respond, you know, basically elaborate on how and we measure sight distances and what the results were in that case. For safety purposes, we like to have the recommended sight distance. That's a recommendation, and it's based on maintaining efficient traffic flow. But for safety purposes, the minimum sight distance that would be required here would be the safe stopping sight distance, which at 40 miles an hour, coming down this, about 5% grade right here is 333 feet, okay? And the theory behind that is that if somebody does exit a side street and for some reason or another just stalls or stops in the middle of the road, oncoming traffic can safely stop and avoid a collision. That is the bottom line criteria. If we don't have the safe stopping sight distance, then it would be an unsafe condition. But we do have much more than the safe stopping sight distance. And in fact, we have met the recommended intersection sight distance for this intersection. So that's basically summarizes the traffic impact study. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Congestion, you're saying there should be no foreseeable difference at Webster intersection?
I'm sorry?
Congestion-wise,
No issues.
Okay.
No issues.
I suppose I'm quite surprised by that, because you refer to a traffic count here, peak traffic volumes of 730 vehicles an hour, and then there's a predicted project-generated peak hour trips, which I assume means anticipated extra trips because of these
Yes.
number of houses.
Yes.
Which is a total at the PM peak hour of 83, which is more than 10% again. Just sounds like a lot to me. How that's not significant, I don't. Like, how do you judge? Is there a standard of significance? Like you say, it's not a significant effect.
Significant would be for traffic congestion,
Yeah.
like level of service. Significant would be reducing the level of service to a lower grade. If we were to drop from a C to a D or a C to an E, that would be significant.
Is there somewhere
But
in
we're
the small
maintaining-
print of how?
I mean, yes, there is some
get to a
incremental
D.
impact. There are going to be, you know, additional delays experienced, but it will still be in that same level of service range
Right.
that
Okay.
exists without the project.
Okay. So in order for you to say that there's any impact, it would need to actually become a category D as opposed to a category C.
Yes.
Right.
Anybody else have any questions?
I read this a while ago. When you did the traffic counts, was it during the school year?
We did, okay, we did the count at Spear Street and Webster Road in late May, May 25th and 26th.
And that was a weekday, I assume.
That's during the school year. There was, further north at Allen Road, we used a V-Trans count that was done in late June, so that would not have been done during the school year.
Okay.
But the one in Shelburne at Webster Road was done during the
Okay.
school year.
And there are more cars going towards Burlington than there are towards like Charlotte, because I don't know what there is in
Yes.
Charlotte, but so would you think there would be any significance in the change going towards, well, going north during the school year? I mean, I'm just curious. Traffic is, yeah, it seems not as insignificant number, though not changing it significantly enough for you to say it's a significant change.
I know we used the directional patterns coming out of Long Meadow Drive onto Shelburne Road, which was the only real comparable residential area that we could find to judge, how much traffic goes north versus south. And I don't have, right at the moment, in my memory exactly when that count was done, whether that was done during the school year or not. I think it's logical that during the school year there would be slightly more traffic going to the south than during, say, the summer vacation or other vacations. Because that's where the schools are, in that direction.
Mark, any questions? Jeff, I'm sorry. Mark? I had a question. Would you regard it as safer from a traffic perspective if the project were to limit what direction you could turn coming out of the project? Say, coming out of the north, you can only go to the north, and coming out of the south, you could only go to the south?
Yes, I think traffic will definitely gravitate towards the entrance or exit that you're traveling in. We did look at the paths, and the dividing line is probably somewhere in here, if you lived in this house, for example, and you wanted to go south, you would probably still go out the north entrance. But if you lived over here, you'd probably go down this way. So there's basically, a little bit of a split in the traffic patterns right about this area. But definitely, the north entrance will serve more traffic going to and from the north, and the south entrance will serve traffic going to and from the south more.
My question is, if the development were limited in such a way that you were prohibited from turning south out of the north entrance, and you were prohibited from turning north out of the south entrance, in other words, right-hand turn only out of the south entrance and left-hand turn only out of the north entrance, would that improve or make it worse?
That would not have any real benefit.
Okay.
Okay. The reason for that is the critical scenario here is a person turning right out of this development with an oncoming southbound car, because the person exiting has to get up to speed while that oncoming southbound car is catching up to them. Okay. A person turning left simply crosses, which can be done actually quicker and with less impact on traffic flow and less impact on safety.
I was thinking more, though, in terms of a situation where somebody coming out of the south wants to turn left, and there's, say, 4 cars stacking up at the stop sign on at Webster and Spear, and therefore you can't really see the oncoming traffic.
There's 600 feet there. There's,
That's plenty?
I
Okay.
mean,
All
that's
right.
at 25 feet per car. That's a lot of cars.
All right, thank you. I think there were some questions in the audience. Ma'am, you want to come forward and please state your name? And I assume you have questions and not evidence?
Question.
Okay, your name, please?
I'm Karen.
Okay, you can ask Mr. Dickinson.
Hi. In regards to the second
Karen, we
entrance,
need to be at the microphone, and then also Mr. Dickinson.
in regards to the second entrance, if you had a school bus that stops, as it does on Colomer Circle and Spear Street, if you have a school bus stop going south, and the cars are backing up behind it, how are the cars coming south that have not yet stopped, stop in time so that they don't cause a domino effect and bang, bang, bang?
First of all,
Mr. Dickinson, you have to get to the microphone.
Here.
That's okay. So the flashing lights on a school bus are actually very high up. And so those flashing lights would be visible to cars coming over that crest, you know, before they even come over that crest. What might not be visible, like you say, is the car, you know, that's stopped for that bus. I don't know, you know, the school districts are going to set their bus stops. I would suspect once this development is completed, that the buses will be circulating inside the development as opposed to picking up children at those two entrance points. And I would be surprised if there would actually be a bus stop established at that, on Spear Street, at that
Ours is-
southern.
The one on Colomer Circle is, they used to go around the whole circle, but then they stopped that, and it's right on Spear Street and Colomer Circle. That's where they pick up the high school kids, and that's where they drop them off. So, it could be changed.
Yeah.
But I was just saying if it was as
Right.
it is up above. And I was just thinking in the wintertime too, when they have all those cars stopping, going up the hill for the bus, and then the bus leaves, and then they have to get going, and are they all going to make it up the hill in the winter?
Again, I think it's more likely that the school bus will be circulating inside the development because it provides a way in and a way out without having to turn around. You know, it's not like they have like a cul-de-sac
It
or
probably
whatever.
could be arranged with the school
Yeah.
system.
Thank you. Anybody else? Any other questions about, yeah, Gail, come on forward.
Just a question, Mr. Dickinson, with reference to Ms. Mitchell's question about the timing of when you took your study. Was not that May 25th weekend or pre-weekend, Memorial Day weekend, when there may have been fewer people going off to school?
Count was done on a Thursday afternoon, Friday morning, I believe, prior to Memorial Day weekend. We would not count on Memorial Day weekend itself. And we certainly, on the Friday afternoon or the Tuesday morning following the holiday, we try to avoid those.
I have a question. I heard it called a bike path, but it's probably going to be more of a multi-use path on the west side of Spear Street. I'm just wondering, I mean, it's going to be an amazing asset for this stretch of Spear Street, and I'm wondering, is there a need for a pedestrian crossing to Quiniesca Club across Spear Street? Or, well, isn't that, I thought it was just for golf carts. Is it
Or pedestrians.
is it signaled?
No, there's a sign there, I believe.
There's a sign, I just drove past it today.
Okay.
Talking about the little things that light up.
Yeah, no, I was just,
Yeah, that's
I was
okay.
curious, when do you have enough people that you need a button somebody can hit and cross across?
The state guidelines for crosswalks basically are 20 people during the highest hour. Yeah. I think that's a little high. I'd like, yeah.
Not per hour, yeah.
They would love.
Yeah. Yeah. But that crosswalk will stay, I guess. I mean, it always struck me as kind of a golf cart crossing, but
If somebody's standing there to cross that's walking, they're pulling a bag, I stop, but
yeah.
doesn't mean everybody does. Try to.
Kate, you had mentioned in your report the possibility of getting an independent traffic study.
Yeah, so not that I'm questioning the validity of this in any way, but we do have resources at the CCRPC, can't remember his last name, who has worked with us quite a lot, and because it's with the CCRPC, it's nominal cost, so I think it's worth taking a second look at, especially since the manager's office and the police department still had concerned. I mean, people fly on Spear Street.
Can we make that order while we're in the partial review process so that the applicant can get that feedback sooner rather than later?
I'm not sure what you mean.
Well, we're not going to be making any decision tonight, are we? Well, we're not going to
Well,
finish
I don't-
tonight anyway,
Yeah,
so.
no, I don't think
Well,
so.
why don't we cross that bridge, because we're going to have to go and move this to another agenda, because I don't think we're going to get, I know we're not going to get through the whole application tonight.
Yeah.
So we can talk about that and address it at the next time the application's before us.
I guess
Chris?
if you are, if you are going to ask for that, I guess what I would request is that you ask for it tonight so that the process can get started, rather than delaying the information if that's something that is going to be requested.
I'm not sure I feel a need for another one. I don't know. How's
Well,
everybody
let's
else
take
feel?
the temperature of the board. Mark?
I'm good with Mr. Dickinson's report.
I would rather see an independent one, personally. I'm not that, yeah.
Miss-
Nobody ever believes traffic reports anyway.
Jeez.
Look what happened on
Mr.
Route 7,
Dickinson,
you know?
do you want to, you had wanted to say something.
I had a chance to look up the answer to your question about when that Long Meadow count was done. And it was done in early June. So it would have been done while the school year was in session.
For Long Meadow, and so that feeds into Shelburne Road.
Yes.
Okay.
And that's what we based the directional patterns on. So that
Okay.
would have been a school year type situation.
And is there significance to having it being fed into a two-lane?
I'm sorry?
If it's being fed into Shelburne Road and it's going into 2 lanes rather than
Right,
just going
but
into like a
it's-
secondary street, like these would be, I mean, Spear Street is.
Right, but they could turn left there at that point. I mean, that's right opposite Joey Mill, or what used to be Joey Mill.
I think what the perspective is that the question is how many people are going south and how many people are going north, and that's what they really wanted to understand, so that they could then make their decision as to how many people are going to be north or south, because we don't really know what people are going to do, what direction they're going to be heading. So you have to use some background data.
Okay. I have one more question on this section, and then we can talk briefly, hopefully, and complete the site preservation, landscaping, and grading and excavation portion of this. The question was, there was the anticipated tax return, and we were wondering who prepared that analysis.
I prepared it.
We figured.
We've done a number of these on a similar scale. I'm not an economist. We've done a number of these for town subdivision reviews and Act 50 reviews over the years, probably a dozen or so. We kind of reviewed the methodology preliminarily with Kate to make sure that we were not out in left field, or to reproduce something that the board might have seen before, if that was the case. If the board wants to see something from an economist, we can certainly do so.
Did anyone have any questions about that report? I'm fine with it. I think the plan is that the, I guess the cottage is 400, or maybe the townhouse is 400, the cottage is 450, and the single-family home's 500.
That is correct.
I'm fine with it. Does anyone else have any issues? Judging from silence, let's move on to site preservation, landscaping, grading, and excavation. The first question I had is how to take care of the trees and everything in your open areas. Is that only just during preparation of the property for construction? Okay. So section 810, I think it's 1. Whoops, wait. Yeah. For site preservation, the question is how to take care of all of the natural resources in the common areas. And I suppose that's probably addressed in your declaration and your bylaws and all that, which I confess I didn't read line by line. Sort of went like that, but.
Are you talking about during construction?
No, I'm talking about in general.
It's in the open space?
Yeah.
Yes, so it is in the declaration and bylaws.
There'll be money paid to preserve the trees and the growth that's there to, if a tree falls, are you going to replace it, or, that kind of stuff?
There would be a capital fund that the association would have to replace something that was planted that might die. Probably less focused on the new planting, replacing the new plantings than necessarily replacing a larger tree that might not make it. As far as what's in the declaration, there's no cutting of any trees in the open space unless they're dead or dying. Again, kind of getting back to the use of the open space, it's really passive recreation, no active uses proposed, so any trees that remained after construction, unless for some reason they died, wouldn't be replaced. But if they were, there is, capital funds that the association would have to replace those.
Okay.
I think I was, I was getting more at during construction, you propose to keep quite a few of the trees, and, how exactly are they going to be protected? Like, you're going to fence them in, so heavy equipment isn't running all over the place or being parked?
Yeah, so in the not the landscape plans, but the erosion prevention sediment control plans, the limits of disturbance would be marked with barrier tape or construction fence. And that would keep just that, the construction equipment out, number one, minimize the area of disturbance so that there's less area to reestablish vegetation in afterward, and obviously also protecting the trees as well. So there, go ahead.
Is there a minimum standard for how far out that needs to, like, if it's an older tree, I imagine a root that?
Usually the drip line.
There we go, Jeff.
Yeah, and we've tried to maximize that by keeping the limits of disturbance pulled all the way out to the limits of the grading. So, where there is clearing going into the woods, along the back of the single-family homes, for example, where there is clearing involved, there's less of trying to follow the drip line because they're all in there together. But certainly in the areas that are open where there's existing trees kind of sprinkled throughout the golf course, we're trying to stay beyond the drip line and even further if possible, given the limits of the proposed grading.
And what about when you are doing blasting, how are you going to protect blasting and also grading, thank you, and water runoff while you're under construction?
Part of their erosion control.
Yeah, so
Right,
there's a
thank
couple
you.
of erosion control plans in there. There's a number of things, aside from the practices like silt fence and erosion matting and daily mulching. The first thing is just phasing construction so that you're only working in a certain area at a certain time, but really minimizing the amount of area that's disturbed at any one time. Phasing street construction so that you're building the streets or utilities in sections. You might not be getting that entire street built, but you're at least getting the utilities in, doing temporary stabilization as you're going. You might be doubling back to put multiple utilities in, but at least minimizing the amount of area that's disturbed at any one time. One of the advantages of rock, there's not many, is that when it's blasted rock, it's not susceptible to erosion. You do have some fines in there, obviously, but in general, the water's filtering down through there. It doesn't have the same potential to pick up sediment that if it was running across typical soil, disturbed soil.
Do all houses have basements?
Yes.
Okay. You anticipate removing rock after blast from the site? You'll have a surplus of rock?
Most likely, yes. We've tried to keep the streets about 2 feet higher than the existing grade, knowing that by the time you strip off the topsoil and any unsuitable material and bring in the gravel for the roadway, you're about 2.5 feet higher. The homes generate an awful lot of fill, the cellar holes. That's another reason we've tried to keep the road high. The road really sets the grade on the individual lots, so keeping the road a little bit higher picks the houses up, minimizes the amount of cut that you've got for the basement, but also gives you an opportunity to use up that cut that you do generate, not only for the home, for the basements, but also for the utilities themselves, to use that material as backfill, creating the yards around the homes.
The last question I had to do with your landscaping, and I know that we looked at and talked a while about saving trees that are there in the area that you're doing construction. How are we gonna know what your tree plan is for saving those trees? And then what has the applicant done to develop a landscaping plan so that it doesn't look like this development fell out of the sky as many in other communities do?
So there's a couple of plans in there showing new plantings. We show the trees that are being saved.
How do we know, that's my question, that,
Oh, how do you know which ones they
yeah,
are?
I think they're the ones that are bold and the ones that are being removed or shaded, is that right?
I can't tell.
Yes, generally the ones along
Oh,
the
I see,
streets
yeah.
are the new street trees.
But I mean, as far as existing ones to remain, I think, is it the ones that are bold of the existing ones that are remaining?
Yeah, so the existing trees to remain are primarily down in this area where there's not any ground disturbance proposed. There's one off the corner of Unit 1C. The majority of them are in this area here.
Yep. And then there's some stands.
And then there's a few in here. There's some additional trees being proposed here and some groupings to kind of break up the back of the homes as you view them from Spear Street at an angle. There's this cluster in here, and there's 3 larger ones that were sort of different from that island of trees, which is mostly red pine, I believe. And then there's a number of white pines in this area that are being saved. One large existing tree that'll be saved adjacent to the street, and then a cluster, which I believe is more of a mix. There are some white pines, but there's a mix of deciduous in here as well. The rest of them are street trees, and as I mentioned, the clusters of new plantings along the back of the yards to break it up with the view from Spear Street.
I didn't fully follow all of that, so let me just ask a couple of questions and maybe get a better idea of what your legend is for this, because if you look at the little berm of land, if you will, or a strip of land between Spear Street and Street C, I can see that there are 3, it looks like at least 3 different types of drawings you have representing trees. You have a sort of a hollow drawing of a tree, a shaded spiky drawing of a tree, and then you have bold circles that are connected, or can't tell if they're connected or what the.
Can you go back one sheet?
So what are they? I can't tell what they represent.
So these are all proposed trees down through here. Because of the grading associated with that street, there's a few existing trees in here, but they're either going to be very close to the bike path or in the grading for the road. So everything in that area is new. We were looking at trying to save this tree here, but again, given the grading that's going to happen on two sides of it, we just didn't think that long-term that tree had a good chance of survival.
Is this tree here that you're talking about depicted on my page 18?
If you look at 5, 6, 7, I think those are the easiest sheets to see the existing
Really?
trees. Yeah, because
Oh, yeah.
on
They're all
those,
connected with lines, too.
Right, the ones that are connected with lines are indicating
Those are
the
new.
new ones with
yeah,
the lines indicating what the species type will be.
so 5 through 8, you can kind of tell which of the existing trees are staying and.
Which ones are going because they're shaded, and
Yeah.
most of them are inside a house or partly.
So the bold ones
are-
of
yeah.
those are the ones that are staying, because there's no new planting on these sheets.
And on
Oh.
the landscaping plan,
The
Got it.
landscaping plan has all the
they're
new,
called out just with a name, like it says pines, for example.
Mm-hmm.
That means they're existing. But all these these that are connected with lines, those are all new.
Gotcha, thank you
If
very
it's
much.
hooked up, and then it's got the designation, like CO, and then
What's the
look up here
practice
Got
and
it.
it tells you
use
what it
so
is.
people
Thank
know
you.
which trees to cut down and not cut down? We've had some bad experiences.
Marking them in the field before construction starts.
What, green paint?
Uh,
Red paint?
No, the limits of disturbance will be marked. So there'll either be an orange construction fence or the 4-inch barrier tape that goes in before the equipment might show up. But before they start doing any ground disturbance, the limits of disturbance are marked so that they know which side of that barrier tape or the fence that they're supposed to be on, so that they're not
Okay.
going into an area and
Sure.
cutting a tree that's supposed to be saved.
And do we have any landmark trees that are standing by themselves that need to be marked?
I mean, it's really the ones on the interior here that are
Yeah,
the
okay.
largest trees that are being saved.
Okay.
So we can take your landscaping as gospel of what's gonna happen.
Yes. I mean, if we're showing a tree that's,
I would qualify that unless between now and when the project starts, if some tree or a couple of trees are either damaged or fall down, there are some old willow trees on the property that are actually starting to die, but they die from the inside out, and you don't know it. And they have commented to me, the golf course, that there are several willow trees that are dying right now on the property.
Okay. Thank you very much. I think that's all I had with anything that had to do with section 800.
So this is all golf course, and it's been fertilized forever and pesticided forever. Is there any concern about the soil not being good?
while you always try to maximize the amount of topsoil you can save,
Yeah,
the Virgin's clay isn't great material to spread, especially on new yards. So I would imagine that there would probably either be topsoil brought in or at least sand brought in and mixed with the existing topsoil in order to make it a little more manageable and workable.
okay.
Related to that, when you were speaking before about how you would do the basements, I think you were asking, and you had said that you would be using a lot of the upturned soil to backfill. And I know from my own experience at my own home that we lived in a really clay area, and when that backfill was done, I ended up with a wet basement. And so I wonder if it makes sense to be using that soil to backfill around the foundations.
There will be rock that we'll be using around the homes, and then also one of our standards is that we have approximately a foot of sand that goes around the foundation of the home as the necessary backfill directly adjacent to the foundation. And then the natural soil can be used further out from there. So we've created a drainage plane along the side of the foundation, and then with the footing drain system that it collects the water underneath the footings, solves and takes away the bathtub problem.
One last item. On the staff report, there's mention that there's non-allowed fill, and the board may require the developer to submit evidence of boring or other soil investigations to determine the depth, composition, and stability of the subgrade within the road section or where the homes are built. And we probably want some evidence that there is an improper fill being used to backfill or build the roads. Can we make that requirement now of the applicant, or is
The
there?
road's being built to standard.
I'm completely against that. That's a means and methods thing. That's none of our, this is a development review board, and I don't think we have anything to do with the means and methods of them building their houses.
Well, no, there's a requirement that says stumps, wood, roots, and other fibrous materials or refuse shall not be used as fill.
Or unstable soils such as silt.
So we have to make sure that nothing unstable is used for fill, but I don't see that happening because there's no testimony.
Right,
mean,
and
all
there
the
are requirements as far as the road goes, and the utilities for that matter, that they're not built on unstable fill material. And in fact, the practice is to do a truck test with Paul Goodrich on all the roads before any of the gravel is brought in. So when the road subgrade is roughed in, you drive a loaded dump truck up one side and back down the other, making sure that there aren't any soft, unyielding soils present. And if there are, you take them out. And usually it's not unsuitable soil, it's an area that you had a trench coming across where you had inadequate compaction.
Right.
Soil was a little bit wet. It's usually not a bad soil issue, it's usually more of a water issue.
Great. I think that, does anyone have any other questions with respect to the first section of the staff report? Yes? What? You do?
Yeah,
Right now?
uh-huh.
Okay, go,
Landscaping.
8 minutes.
okay.
So maybe I may head off, I don't know.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
didn't do the landscaping plan. Brian Trembeck in our office, I know that was a comment that Kate had made.
I was going to ask about that.
So Brian Trembeck in our office did the landscaping plan. He's not a landscape architect. He's been
Okay.
doing the landscape design plans in our office for a number of years now.
Okay.
He's our wetland and soil scientist. He's also a master gardener. He's been through the urban forest stewardship training program, which I think is the equivalent of the forest warden training. As I said, he's been doing our landscaping plans for all of our projects. We've gotten fairly good feedback in other municipalities. He's obviously not here tonight, but we'd be happy to bring him to the next meeting if you've got questions that would be better answered by him
Sure.
than me, for sure.
Sounds good. Just one thing I'll say is for a development this size, it feels pretty minimum. Just the overall landscaping, like the landscaping between Spear Street and the back of those homes. It's that's just my feeling. I know we have a thing that we can require, they follow a formula. I think that's something we should discuss. The trees are all pretty small caliper. There's not a lot of diversity in the different choices for the homes, and, the street trees are somewhat diverse, but, so it's just my general feeling right now, but that would be great to ask questions. Yeah.
Meeting, and we can ask questions of him and then beef up that. 'Cause
Yep.
do we have the right to ask, I think, for a landscape architect to do a plan?
Well, I'm not questioning he's a master gardener.
Okay, you're
I'm fine
okay.
with, yeah.
Okay.
But it's more just the, amount.
The
and-
size and the amount of trees. Well, let's have them come to the next meeting.
I would just make a comment that, and maybe I was naive when I first looked at what's been presented before, but I'm surprised that more trees are not being saved. Maybe I thought that more, and maybe it's because the design's changed, I don't know, but.
I think the grading probably has a lot to do with that. Just, you can't really grade around trees that you're saving, but.
The
you
other
guys
thing
should-
that happened during the design process of sketch plan is the project moved east.
Yeah.
And so there was more preservation in other areas, but when the project moved east it basically gave more open space on the western portion of the property, and it impacted that side. Impacted more trees that are existing on the property than was previously proposed.
But we had wanted we wanted to flip the project around. I think that's what, because the houses were all facing toward or a lot of them were, or some of them were, if I remember. correctly.
It pulled it out of the woods.
Yeah.
And then it reorientated the majority of the houses. So it wasn't, yeah.
We were at the back. And I do think that where they've saved trees, it's nice that they've saved areas of trees. A lot of times when you save one tree and you build around it, you lose it in 5 years, yeah. They might look okay initially, but, so I do think that's a nice feature that in the center areas, they've saved kind of areas of trees.
Excellent. I think, unless there's any more questions on these topics, I'll take a motion to, do we have any other business? First of all, this is going to be continued to, can we continue to the next meeting, to November 1? Or, okay, is that okay? Does that work for you, Andy and Chris? Great.
What's the agenda?
I think it'll be okay.
And then, is there any other business to take up this evening? I'll take-
I didn't hear whether or not I guess there wasn't necessarily a motion or a request to have the CCRP do the traffic? No? Okay.
I'm lost.
The
traffic
Oh, yeah, no, we didn't pass that request. Thank you for pointing that out. So, any other business? None? I'll take a motion to adjourn. Anyone?
We have to continue this hearing first.
I thought we just did.
We have to vote on it.
Oh, sorry.
I'll make a motion to continue the hearing to November 1, 2017.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? None? Thank you, Mark. Any other business? Hearing none, I'll take a motion to adjourn. Second? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you.
Route 7.